Oh, you are excellent.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's an absolute delight to be able to welcome you here today. My name is Eka Ekwe. I'm the director of the African Leadership Center here at King's College London. I'm also a professor in development economics in Africa here at King's College London as well. So, to tonight's proceedings, excellencies and colleagues, it is my distinct honor to welcome you all in the room and those of you online to King's Africa Week 2025. It's the 7th one in the series. I can barely believe that myself saying it up here. This evening's keynote event launches us into this year's Africa Week theme, Disrupting Distances, Nations, Systems, and Leadership. Over the week, we will collectively engage with this theme through a wide range of fascinating conversations, lectures, panels, book talks, debates, simulations, performances, and film screenings, with participation from across 5 faculties here at King's College London, our partner institutions, of course, in Africa, in Europe, and in the rest of the world as well. On the screen, you will be able to scan a QR code to get more information about the range of Africa Week events we have this week. I really look forward to welcoming you to many of those events as well. This year's Africa Week will address the questions of what forms of leadership will disrupt the growing distances between nations and between institutions and the people they are supposed to serve. A second question that we're contending with is how can Africa exercise greater agency in disrupting these distances created by global power hierarchies? And this evening's keynote event, in response to that, is titled Positioning Africa in Global Power Hierarchies, What Does the UN Pact for the Future Offer Africa? Today's event is co-hosted by the African Leadership Center and the High Commission of Tanzania to the United Kingdom in partnership with Amani Africa. I will now welcome our co-chairs for this evening to take you through the rest of the evening. Professor Fumi Olonishakin, Vice President, International Engagement and Service, and co-chair of the board of the King's Global Health Partnerships, and Professor of Security, Leadership and Development here at King's College London. Our second chair, of course, is His Excellency High Commissioner for Tanzania to the UK, Ambassador Mbelwa Kairuki. Thank you so much. If I can have our co-chairs join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eka. Good evening, Excellencies, distinguished guests, distinguished colleagues, leadership scholars at King's College London students. It's nice to see you in large numbers in the room. Shall I say, as we do in Africa, all protocols observed. We have brought Africa to the UK in large numbers. May I then say, building on Eka's wonderful introduction, that we are in a particular moment in time. Last year, in this very hall, we talked about Africa's agency. Is African agency for sale, for hire, or for renewal? That was the core question of last year's conversation. At that time, we talked about the turbulence in global affairs. Actually, there is massive turbulence of the proportion that we could not have imagined in this space last year. Therefore, the question of the forms of leadership that would disrupt the growing distances between nations and between institutions and the people that they're supposed to serve is more urgent today than ever before. What do we want to do tonight? It's an open debate which will be preceded by a keynote. What I want to take us through is the ground rules for that open debate. Just like last year, but we know that at this time last year we were practicing, it was a practice run for what is now the African Public Square. We launched the African Public Square in Nairobi last June on the questions of militiafication, as Professor Tadese called it, and deinstitutionalization, looking at Sudan and South Sudan. Ambassador Francis Deng really introduced in his keynote the question at the core of conflict in the Sudans. And we talked about a solution. There was an intergenerational debate. Today's questions are about the global dilemmas, are about the power hierarchies in the global space. The questions have already been posed. We will have a keynote. After the keynote, I shall come back and invite an eminent panel to the stage to respond. First to the keynote, Ambassador Linda Scott will talk about the salient points, and then the rest of the panelists will begin to respond to the questions. Thereafter, we will open the floor to the debate. When we open the floor to the debate, we will open the book. Someone goes around the room, takes names of people who want to respond to the core questions. First, then Ambassador Kairuki calls the diplomats in the room to respond. Then I will call the academic, policy actors and students to come to the front. So here are the rules. Each panel respondent will offer their responses for 3 minutes only. Those speakers who have been invited to contribute to the debate, especially the ambassadors, will be called upon at the appropriate time by Ambassador Kairuki. I will call at the appropriate time on the academic community members that want to respond. Additional speakers who are invited from the audience to join this debate must observe this rule. Speakers from the floor will not address questions to any of the prior speakers. Rather, they will contribute to the debate by offering a new fact or supporting or opposing a position that has been articulated with clear reasons. This is an academic environment, after all. Or by offering a new perspective on the key issues raised in the debate so far. We have not invited you to this debate to just be spectators. We want you to help us address the core questions at the heart of the debate. It's not for people to sit on stage and we are throwing salvos and questions at them. They don't have all the answers. No, do they even have the answers at all in some cases? Collectively, we will provide our answers. And that is the end of this period of the ground rules. It's my great pleasure to invite our co-host, the High Commissioner of Tanzania to the United Kingdom, who will give us some opening remarks. Ambassador Kairuki, you're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Naledi Pandor, former Foreign Minister of South Africa, Excellencies, High Commissioners and Ambassadors present here, Professor Fumi, Vice President, International Engagements and Services, King's College, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Let me start by thanking King's College for convening the Africa Public Square Open Debate and granting Tanzania High Commission an opportunity to co-host tonight's debate on positioning Africa in global power hierarchies. This is the first of many events of King's College to commemorate Africa's Week. Allow me also to welcome and express sincere appreciation to our keynote speaker, Dr. Pandor, and distinguished panelists for accepting our invitation and to participate in tonight's debate. I also welcome all participants who joined us here at King's College, Bush House, and those who have joined us online. I recognize the presence of high commissioners, ambassadors, members of the academia, media, think tank. All of you, we say karibu sana. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as Professor Fumi mentioned earlier, tonight's focus is on Africa's position in shifting order in which global power hierarchies are evolving at an unprecedented speed, and in which institutions such as United Nations are struggling to redress the imbalances. In recent times, we've witnessed imbalances in terms of peace and security, imbalances in terms of sustainable and equitable development, imbalances in the provision for human and special groups' rights, imbalances in building up resilience for global governance, imbalances in embracing digital cooperation for the good of humanity. Tonight, we are looking forward to hearing solutions for those imbalances from the keynote speaker, panelists, and the audience in tonight's debate. To start us on this debate is our keynote speaker, Dr. Pandor. I'm honored to introduce her tonight. As you all know, she's a very familiar face to most of us. She's a South African politician, educator, and academic who has held various cabinet portfolios in the government of South Africa. She is immediate past Minister for International Relations, but also she has held various portfolios, education, science and technology, etc. Dr. Pandor holds a master's degree in education from University of London and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Stellenbosch. She obtained a doctorate in education from the University of Pretoria, and following her distinguished career and important contributions, she has received honorary doctorates from various universities, including honorary doctorate from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, the University of Stellenbosch, and the University of Lisbon in Portugal, as well as University College of Dublin in Ireland, and many more. Dr. Pandor taught at distinguished institutions such as Ernst Bevin School, Town College of Education, University of Botswana, and the University of Cape Town. With a background in education, policy planning, Dr. Pandor held several cabinet portfolios, including Minister of Education, Minister of Science and Technology, Minister of Home Affairs, and Minister of Higher Education and Training. And Dr. Pandor was awarded Germany's highest federal honor, the Grand Cross of Merit. She was described by the Germans as a symbol of new South Africa, modern, innovative, dedicated to scientific progress, and outstanding female leadership. Therefore, having her in our midst as our keynote speaker, we are very honored. Thank you so much for accepting to be a keynote speaker. So, ladies and gentlemen, please let us put our hands together for a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Dr. Pandon. Karibu sana.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. We had a very interesting debate when I got here earlier about this room and whether I could speak standing in the middle of the stage, because then you would all be able to see me. Because if I have a lectern, they call this a lectern, it looks like a tall table to me, but if I have a lectern, then I'll be to the side of the stage and you may not be able to hear or see. I sacrificed and said I'd stand in the middle and hold the iPad and try my best. But it doesn't really make sense, so I shall use the tall table. And I hope you don't mind. Allow me then to begin by recognizing Professor Atuni, who has welcomed us so warmly this evening, and of course their excellencies, ambassadors and high commissioners, distinguished academics, and participants to this Africa Week. It's a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I must admit that as Professor Funmi set out all the rules for the discussion later, I got really nervous and I thought, gosh, I'm glad I'm not doing that part of the test. But my warm greetings to all the leadership and staff of the Africa Leadership Center and to all the distinguished participants. I would like to sincerely thank the center for granting me this wonderful privilege of presenting the opening talk at this year's Africa Week. I look forward later to learning from your contributions in reaction to this talk. When thinking about this evening's talk, I returned to an anthology of poems written and published by Mongani Wale Sirote in 2004. In one of his poems, he asks, "Must I believe that I asked that there was pre-colonial time, there was slave trade, there was colonialism, there was apartheid, and because these were there is racism. Who must I ask in these times of agreement? Who must I ask when it seems there are no witnesses? In this time, when the burden of the past is also mine. With no accomplices, there have been no perpetrators. Who must I ask?" I found this poem relevant for me to the quest that many in the world have been part of in the past, a quest to find out who cares and who acts. In a sense, the question Sirote poses is, what has happened to the global generation of free Nelson Mandela? A generation that established a level of international solidarity that placed such pressure on the apartheid state of South Africa that it had to move to negotiations. I wonder whether such international solidarity is possible in the world Sirote poses questions to. The wars in Ukraine and Gaza and the sustained harm endured by people in these countries, accompanied by totally inadequate global commitment to peace, show very clearly that the global community has to find new, refreshed strategies for entrenching peace and security and for protecting the innocent. For those who might not know what I'm referring to, when we were engaged in the struggle against apartheid, when we realized that petition wasn't sufficient to what needed to happen, our leaders traveled all over the globe, engaging world leaders and asking them to join us in our struggle against apartheid, asking them to boycott, to sanction, to take any act that would help advance our cause for freedom. They didn't get positive responses from the governments that they approached, but civil society responded. Sports organizations, creative artists, trade union movements, church organizations, all religious faiths, they said, we will join you in your struggle, and we will boycott, we will sanction, and we will support your struggle for freedom. Through that wonderful initiation of an international solidarity of global dimensions, we were able to exert a great deal of pressure on the apartheid state and get to a point where it became a pariah in the world through global action, not because of ourselves on our own. Of course, we were active in our country, our masses, our freedom fighters, our liberation organizations, but the aspect of being joined by international solidarity, international action was extremely important. The academic boycotts, the sports boycotts, many of the actions that many of you are probably aware of played such a critical role in helping us to achieve our freedom. Today, those who struggle believe that they are alone, that we no longer have that courage. That's why I'm saying, what happened to the generation of Free Nelson Mandela? The campaign calling for freeing of Nelson Mandela was so powerful that on the occasion of his release from Robben Island, a journalist approached a young boy in Soweto, and he asked him, what is Mandela's first name? And this is not made up, it's real. And the child said, release. Because whenever he heard the name Mandela, he had released Mandela. And so he wasn't aware or familiar with the name Nelson. To him, Mandela was released. And it was that international campaign that made that word so evocative and famous. So I think that we must be worried that we lack the ability to establish similar popular actions in the interest of those who face harm today. We meet at a deeply troubled period in global relations and should be concerned not only at Africa's inadequate progress, but also, and most particularly, about growing threats to universal civil liberties and the practice of democracy. We should worry that instability in Libya has lasted so long, at 4 major coups in Africa, about civil war in Sudan, about the Rohingya and their tragic suffering, and about the peoples of Palestine and Israel trapped in a cruel, never-ending war of existence. The past decade has been witness to these international failings and to a sometimes subtle and often boldly open assault on freedom and democracy. Sadly, as civil society, we seem to have observed this decline in our civil and political liberties, and all of us have proven rather incapable of decisive, effective responses, in a manner suggesting that we believe surely it can't get worse. The worst can't happen. And yet today I think we're seeing that it can get worse. I believe we may now indeed be in the midst of the worst of these assaults on freedom and democracy. And we have to ready ourselves to assert and restore the core values and principles of freedom, democracy, justice, and development. Even more concerning is the growing unashamed assault on academic freedom and on the academy and knowledge generation. This has to be resisted by all of us who support intellectual freedom and the free flow of ideas. The opportunities for success of Africa that I will refer to here require a free flow of ideas and freedom to pursue innovation and new knowledge. If we allow governments to tell universities what they should be doing, knowledge generation and innovation are in trouble. And so we should worry at the intrusion of government into our institutions. Our continent, Africa, continues to be a place riddled with many deeply challenging problems. Some authors describe these challenges in very pejorative prose, such as in a fascinating book, Prisoners of Geography, by Tim Marshall, who ascribes the problems to the inability of Africans to derive value from the strategic assets of their geography, and somewhat neglects, I believe, reference to the influence of imperialism and colonial oppression to Africa's progress. Konege and Mtembu are kinder in their musing on Africa's ability to navigate very complex, constantly shifting geopolitics. They propose in their book several areas of strategic opportunity that Africa could focus upon to evade its constant definition as a continent of failure. Adding to this fresh way of looking at Africa, Adebayo illustrates that in the past 3 decades, there have been periods in which there were visible signs of Africa bravely emerging from dismal growth, inadequate development, and high levels of poverty and inequality. I wonder how many of us remember that in just around 2011 to 2014, we had 13 African countries in the fastest growing economies in the world, and today we're in a very terrible position. The reversals evident leading up to the COVID-19 pandemic and those that persist today indicate our deep-seated problems remain stubborn and difficult to eradicate. These negative attributes exist even in newly democratic and free South Africa, posing a deeply complex intellectual dilemma for the best minds of Africa and its diaspora. In Adebayo's well-crafted essays on Pan-Africanism, he provides a rare intellectual depth that appears to overcome the laziness of Black blaming for inequality and disadvantage. He illustrates the need for sharper intellectual tools if we are to extract effective solutions to Africa's complex problems. He also provides rare insight into the value we could derive from a strengthened, well-executed Pan-African strategy, giving effect to the African Union Charter's affirmation of Africans in Africa working closely with all Africans in the diaspora to jointly pursue the permanent renewal of Africa. Our habit of working as discrete 54 countries has not helped us achieve our goals. This new epoch and era requires a connected, strongly united Africa and its African diaspora. This lack of continued decisive, sustained progress of Africa is a global problem that all the world's leaders should be concerned about. Konege argues in his essay in Mapungubwe's publication on global geopolitics and Africa's position. He argues that in looking solely at problems, we neglect the inherent strategic global attributes that Africa has of abundant ocean, abundant land, and people. And he says these should be the fulcrum of our consideration rather than merely looking at our problems. Perhaps we need to begin with a different set of reflections on Africa, he argues. There are several reasons, I think, for this assertion. You would recall that W.E.B. Du Bois famously asserted in the late 19th century that racism and racial inequality would be the great problems of the 20th century, and implied in a number of essays that the 20th century would be the one in which this weighty problem confronting humanity would be resolved. Yet today, we know we exist with race still being a stark social barrier to human progress, possibly because we failed to fully embrace Du Bois' belief that it would be African social agency organized in a range of civil society organs that would lead to African emancipation. I think we need to find and empower those tools that can support our progress. The second reason for asserting our problems is that Africa, and looking at us differently, is that Africa is a land that has abundant natural resources that will continue to play a key role in technological advances and smart manufacturing. We may not yet have control of AI, but AI can't exist without our minerals. And we need to be alert to that. And thus, it is vital that strategies are found to ensure that Africa becomes core to innovation rather than an excluded user of goods from elsewhere. Linked to the strategic imperative is the urgency of Africa addressing the matter of Africa-based beneficiation and industrial productivity. You cannot be the success we wish to be without producing and value-adding your own goods to your own natural resources. And we need to take this seriously and not make populist statements about it. Third, our continent has vast swathes of arable land that can serve as a global rescue to the food insecurity and low agricultural productivity that may result from anticipated climate change effects and unsustainable exploitation of the world's food production resources. Effective development programs and cooperative partnerships could position Africa to feed all of humanity. Fourth, Africa has the positive attribute of a majority youth population, which, if appropriately supported and empowered, will become the fulcrum of future African development. Of course, if this demographic dividend of energetic human resources is wasted through poor education, inadequate skills acquisition, and limited integration into the globe, the world will become a loser alongside Africa. Rather than criminalizing immigration, strategies for skills collaboration and technical cooperation should be agreed. African countries should assess their strategic assets and needs and develop strategies to derive maximum benefit of growth and development. All of these four factors support arguments that highlight that Africa and all regions lacking development opportunities, productive capacity, and vibrant public institutions should be given dedicated, robust support to reverse these maladies. Further evidence of the need for this fresher responsiveness lies in the worrying reality of many in our continent feeling democracy is a failed project and looking to militarism for relief. It is difficult to project realization of the aforementioned changes and responses, largely because the geopolitical context in which I propose these changes is mired in conflict, double talk, and extremely weak attachment to the values and principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, its conventions, and treaties. The most powerful nations in the world have dismally failed to uphold the values of global unity, cooperation, and human security. The worst breaches of international law have been committed most often by the powerful and most often against the weak. Instead of the most educated, most wealthy, and most empowered acting in the interest of all and assisting to realize the aspirations of W.E.B. Du Bois, they have continued racial and gender exploitation, found new forms of discrimination, divided the world further through Islamophobia and other forms of prejudice. All of this occurs in a world in which we have developed modern, sophisticated human rights law, international law, and international humanitarian law. The world does not lack universal guidelines for basic laws and principles. The problem is those with the greatest wealth, with sophisticated institutional capacity and influence on global progress, have respect for international law only when it suits their interests. We've all observed this starkly in the past 3 years. The reactions to Russia's invasion of Ukraine were very different from reactions to the continued oppressive occupation of Palestine. This unfairness and double standard has begun to carve a dangerous world in which impunity for some can be utilized by many leaders as a rationale for diminished freedoms. The impact of this neglect of equal protection through international law has resulted in serious breaches as seen in Gaza, Sudan, and Myanmar, and even with the taking of Israeli hostages. All harm to human beings needs to be talked about, and not some harm and neglect of others. The potential for African geopolitical leadership and influence has not yet fully realized its promise. I believe African leaders fail to lead in multilateral bodies and often fail at African unity when opportunities to lead arise. This is not always due to African failure. It is linked to how Africa is treated and persuaded, and how we gauge our geopolitical influence, and how we develop our approaches to world affairs. So if I can get that aid for that major project I've been interested in, I will not support the candidate for the Atomic Energy Agency because I've been persuaded that another more powerful country is more appropriate to that position. Then you find Africa divided on the multilateral stage. A welcome shift was evident when our leaders initiated a peace mission to Russia and Ukraine. Sadly, this leadership for peace was not sustained. I wish they had. I think they'd have done better than many of the leaders today. We have had many moments of hope in our determination to build a better world. All of us, for example, had hope for significant change when the world renewed its global compact for development in 2015 through adopting the SDGs. The UN and its members then appeared ready to lead a new innovative development agenda. Tragically, inadequate funding and weak implementation efforts resulted in a failure to meet the targets. The recently adopted Pact for the Future reflects much of the content of the SDGs and moves beyond them through acknowledging the flaws in the UN mechanisms and structures and the failures of Bretton Woods institutions. Fundamental UN reform and remodeling of development finance institutions are key to creating a possible foundation for new paradigms and genuine transformation. If UN reform is allowed to be mere tinkering and a repeat of the flawed 1948 arrangements, we will have continuing decline in respect for international law and widespread mistrust in multilateralism. Ensuring this does not happen requires a newly energized Africa. It requires a confident African leadership that is aware of its powerful attributes and is ready to put them to good use for Africa and the world. We require an Africa that views the current toxic geopolitical environment as an inflection point, one in which the South can and should mobilize to construct progressive ideas and values to Africa and to the global community. Ideas that reject neocolonialism, ignorance, and prejudice. Ideas based on research, knowledge generation, and collaboration for shared development. We need an Africa that will recognize the urgency of investing in knowledge-generating institutions, investing in research and in innovation. We have not utilized our universities as partners for development and change, and we need to reverse the decline in African university systems. There is good reason for hope at present. The adoption of the second decadal plan of Agenda 2063 and a determined approach in the African Union to implement the plan gives us hope. Second, the ratification and implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and actual steps to make it work. Third, the strengthening of African regional economic communities and their increased focus on economic integration, peace, and security. And four, a growing commitment to democracy and accountability. And fifthly, the emergence of China, India, and Brazil as trusted political and trade partners, offering Africa a different form of collaborative partnership, devoid of the colonial imprint of the past. So, how should Africa respond to this moment? Should it focus on partnerships that work or follow the failed rigidity of aid and indebtedness? To some degree, the reality that the ideas from the post-colonial West are not the best offers Africa the opportunity to act independently and differently, and to develop new, more impactful partnerships. I see the Pact of the Future as a new agenda that should be carefully considered alongside the key goals of Agenda 2063. Africa has to utilize this critical moment to assert her ability to influence positive change in the world. There are some signs of positive beginnings, but they're not sufficient to the immense tasks confronting Africa. Perhaps current threats to trade through tariffs, to investing in health by stopping funding for AIDS medication in South Africa, and our commitment to pursue and achieve equality will convince our leaders to rise up and decisively confront the world. The Pact of the Future could be used as an agenda for Africa in close connection to Agenda 2063. It is also a roadmap for Africa and the South, for BRICS, for the non-aligned movement, and for the African Union, all of whom should come together in a focused agenda-setting process and agree modalities for advancing the key objectives set out in the Pact. We should welcome the recent statements of the presidents of Malaysia, South Africa, and Colombia, heralding the creation of the Hague Group as a collective of countries determined to uphold international law and reject impunity in abuse of human rights. In 2024, in New York, all agreed that the UN Security Council must be reformed to be more effective, representative, and efficient. We in Africa should refine our perspectives on reform, re-establish consensus, and insist that text-based negotiations must get underway in the United Nations. We should no longer talk about reform. We should actually be seeing the concrete proposals on this subject. Africa has long supported another aspect of the pact, a nuclear-free world, and countries such as South Africa have played a leading role in actively advocating for nuclear disarmament. It is nuclear powers that breach this goal consistently. We need to become more knowledgeable about the progressive use of nuclear technology and direct African university research and innovation toward the sector. We should not be mere observers on nuclear matters just because it is such advanced science. In the goal of space governance, at this time, this is largely a concern of the West. It's intriguing when you read the Pact of the Future, how the framing sometimes serves Western perspectives rather than global perspectives. In fact, I was a little concerned that in the sectors, the sections that dealt with advanced technology, there was scant reference to development opportunities. Some African countries on space, such as Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, and Algeria, have competent space agencies, but do not have the level of funds required to participate fully in a global space program. Africa should determine its satellite development agenda, establish potential partnerships with international space agencies, and provide for the training of space science skilled professionals. The focus of the Pact on emerging technologies and their development for wider human-centered use is a critical opening for our continent. Technology is an astounding enabler if properly exploited, and we need to make the digital leap that was first espoused in the new Partnership for Africa's Development. All of our debt-burdened countries fully support reform of international finance institutions, including review of the use of local currencies for trade. And of course, the SDGs remain central focus areas for global development, including expanded success in achieving gender equality. I must stress that the youth are critical to the future of Africa. The Future Pact indicates that our investment in young people has to increase and that we have to recast into an organized preparation for future youth leadership. The adoption of this pact has created an opportunity for us to show the world that we can address global failures and lead modernization of Africa into a continent that comes into its own by clearly distinguishing itself from a tired West and by utilizing Africa's significant wealth to set a new agenda and to pursue progressive development. Negotiating this critical moment with a concerted focus on development priorities for Africa is the only way that Africa can secure positive advantage. Attempting to reason with the illogic of unequal relations will not support our success. We need to empower ourselves to initiate and lead our own agenda for success. This is the crucial social agency Du Bois foresaw as a rescue for African dignity, and we have to act on his vision. I thank you for listening to me.
Dr. Naledi Pandor, I think you heard the response to your keynote. This is why we wanted content before the debate. Need I say anymore? Now, I want to invite our panelists to the stage. Ambassador, Excellency Linda Scott, Ambassador of Namibia. Please welcome to the stage. Please welcome. Thank you. I would like to welcome the Ambassador of Morocco. Oh, thank you, Excellency. Welcome to the stage. We promised you an eminent panel of diplomats and academics. Some of the most distinguished policy academics are in this room. I want to invite to the stage Dr. Alex Vines. He needs no introduction. That's the Director of Africa Programs in Chatham House. And I think most of the diplomats in this room have been convened in Chatham House over a period of time. He needs no introduction. Now, I am heavily biased. A sister of mine who started out long ago at King's and who has since moved to bigger, greater, better things, the President and CEO of the International Crisis Group, Dr. Comfortero. Our panelists will provide some texture for what we have just heard. And those in the room must have heard about 10 or a dozen statements about where Dr. Naledi Pandor stands and the historical trajectory of some of her ideas, very well laid out. What I want to do is to first ask Ambassador Scott to try to spend 3 minutes, please. I'm usually very tight on time, so I'm going to move us along and say, please give us your reflections, salient points in terms of what you've just heard. And then I'll begin to ask the other panelists to make statements about the core questions and about what you've heard. Ambassador Scott.
Thank you, Professor Funmi, for giving me the floor. I can never do justice to that very, very excellent and on-point statement by Dr. Pandor. But allow me just to say what stood out for me and what I, in my 3 minutes, could highlight. And that is, of course, that Africa must unite. That is the bottom line. We buried Dr. Sam Nujoma on the weekend, and that was his, almost his mantra, as it were. Africa must unite. And that is the bottom line, I think, of what Dr. Pandor was saying. But she said there are 4 aspects that I picked up. One is working as 54 countries is not helping us. And as such, let's work with the UN, let's work with the Pact for Africa, and let's work on our agenda, Agenda 2063, which we as Africa have developed for ourselves. We've got our implementation plan, so let's put it into action. And secondly, we've got our natural resources, and we've got our arable land. So let us use that to build our continent, but not only build our continent, but to build a better world. And so I think that is bottom line. The fact is that, is it by 2050, 1 in 4 or so people in the world will be African. So we have got the power of youth on our side. And that's one of the highlights that Dr. Pandor spoke about, is that with our youth majority, we should look to our future development, not only for the continent, but for the world. And for that, we need to look at our skills education, our skills acquisition, our education, and to see how we as Africans can build up for ourselves. And what I loved was that Dr. Pandor spoke about the African continent plus the diaspora as one group. I think we have such power in our diaspora, and I think that has been proven by Ethiopia, for example, when they were raising money for the dam that they were building. They really relied heavily on the diaspora. Well, if one country can do that, and I know that's not the only country, I'm just using that as an example, then I believe that we as Africa can do that to build our own continent. And then finally, on arable land, you know, whenever, I mean, coming from the driest country on the planet, Namibia's got 2 deserts, and we struggle with water, as do many countries in Africa, but we actually have lots of arable land. And we can utilize that, we can build on our irrigation. We've built a dam in the desert in Namibia, for example, and it's full. It was full before that dam was even completed, you know. So there is a lot of hope in the desert. There's a lot of hope for Africa. And I think when we look at the potential for Africa, not only to develop itself, but to develop a positive world, particularly in the spirit of W.E.B. Du Bois. I love that you said Du Bois, because when I was in America, everyone said Du Bois. But the thing is that what we can do is we can focus on what it is that we want, focus on that vision, just the way that our African, the leaders of Africa who set up the African Union, the Organization for African Unity in 1963, what they focused on is what we need to focus on, a united Africa and where we can go together with that. And I'm going to stop with that, except to say that technology was highlighted by Dr. Pandor, and we need to get a grip on technology as it works for Africa. Appropriate technology, for heaven's sake, that was a sort of slogan when I was a student. Just let's have appropriate technology. I can't believe that I'm still talking about that in my 60s. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that was excellent. What we wanted was some salient points and with your own reflections. So let's now begin to move through the panel to hear, for example, Ambassador. How do you want to respond to the questions at the core of this debate? If you want to make a statement or two about what you heard in the keynote, please do so. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, and a lot has been already said. I think one of the questions was about the UN Pact. And I think from what we heard, there's absolutely no sustainable UN Pact without Africa being at the core. I think what we heard is, you know, a statement about the challenges, but a lot about the opportunities that we see. I think it's an Afro-optimist narrative that we heard, and I think it's time for Africa to take on this narrative. We all know the numbers. We spoke about the youth. More than 1 billion young people in Africa by 2050 under the age of 25. 60% of the world arable lands are in Africa. You mentioned it, Linda. 80% of them are unused. And we need to take on our natural resources and use them for the continent. It brings the question of industrialization. I think it's very important. We need to industrialize the continent. We need to work on regional integration. We cannot still have this fragmented continent. Of course, it's 54 countries, but regional integration is critical to be able to move away from the disparities. And we need also, and this is what we heard, we cannot still work on linear solutions. What the world is showing today is the need and the imperative to think out of the box. We need disruptive solutions for that. On regional integration is the same thing. We obviously speak about transport, connectivity, and so forth, but how about the role of energy today? Energy is a key thing about, you know, bringing peace and prosperity, resolving conflict. How do we do about this? The nexus security peace development is an imperative. We need to work on the vacuum that is very often used to impose solutions to us. African solutions for African challenges. This is what we need as well. I also heard about the youth, the innovation technology. Linda, you mentioned it. I mean, we saw the mobile revolution in Africa. I mean, when we see still the bureaucracy, we need a more agile Africa. We need to leverage technology innovation on our youth to be able to be, on top of the game when it comes to technology. We need to show that to secure seats at the UN, we have built our capabilities, leapfrog technology, not just adapt, leapfrog. So this is something I think that can be definitely be accessible to us. Another point I would like to make is about disrupting distances. To disrupt distances, we need also to be able to build on regional champions across the continent, to do triangular partnerships, to work for the collective interest of the continent and the region, and not just for national interest. We need better better relations between neighboring countries. This is critical, away from inter-African rivalries. And lastly, I would say that we need to shape our own narrative and our own way of doing partnerships. We need to define our terms of reference. We need to be more proactive, not just be passive and say, who is coming to us to do a partnership? What is it that we want? We need to impose our own ways of doing partnerships, our terms of reference. Otherwise, others will do it for us. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I hope ALC students in the room are picking up those ideas, right? Some of the things you are hearing in this room are not in textbooks in standard forms. So please listen carefully. May I just say that the list is open. Those who want to join this debate from the floor, please put your names on the list. And I'll remind everyone again about the ground rules. Now let's hear from our academics, policy academics. Alex, I'll go to you first.
Policy academic.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for me, the emphasis point is that this is a really critical moment, watershed. The global governance systems are in crisis. Dr. Pandor talked about how the West is tired. She also said old ideas of the West, probably not the best. So it's a marketplace for new ideas, new narratives, new approaches. And Security Council reform is a key part of that. There are promising signs. The coordination of the Africa Free Plus. So it's not just African countries, currently Somalia, Algeria, and Sierra Leone, but Guyana, for example. So it's playing back to what Dr. Panda was saying, are coordinating common positions in conjunction with African Union. Go to the African Union website, see the A3 plus statements that are there. We wouldn't have seen this 5 years ago. This is positive steps forward. Africa now is a member of the G20. It's going to be co-celebrating in South Africa the first ever G20 summit on African soil. So that's 2 memberships of the G20 are African. Why did that happen? Incredible lobbying by Africans, but also growing consensus amongst the international community that the African Union should be part of G20. And so what I'm thinking is that this is the moment for African countries to reach common positions, to really shake the global governance system. And, Dr. Pandor's Tired West is open. Look, for Security Council reform, last year the UK said, oh, absolutely, 2 African countries can be on UN Security Council. They can't have a veto, but they can be on the UN Security Council. So did France, then did the US. Russia said, yeah, okay, that's fine with us too. And then China also, yes, we support Security Council reform, although haven't defined a formula. So again, there's real progress in this area. And for example, if you see what President Madabio in the open debate on this last year, during the presidency of Sierra Leone, the UN Security Council, he pushed really hard, saying we need veto also. And these are the debates that need to happen. So getting there requires partnerships, including, actually, I have to say, with the tired West, yes. It might be tired, but Funmi is here. She doesn't look tired, and she's working in the West. And so I think clever partnerships that are based on mutual respect and recognition are really important. And skills are going to be premium in this, and ability to show solidarity and networking. And where are the Mandela generation? I don't know. We're still part of that Mandela generation. I mean, you know, I was living in Mozambique, witnessing South African destabilization. So thankfully, my first name wasn't Free, but it was something else. Then final point. I'm more ambitious, actually, than our panelists. I don't want to see Africa just marginalized to the African continent. I want to see African solutions to global problems. And I want to see an equitable world where everybody has equal partnership. And so my one worry is just to siloize African to Africa, because we've all been struggling. My career has been struggling to avoid that, which is to globalize and mainstream African voices. Thank you.
All right, I'm trying very hard to be disciplined. So I will not offer a response in respect for the ground rules to what you said about me being located here, Alex. I'm going to let it, I'm going to let it pass for now. Last but not least, Comfort, please respond to what you heard.
Me to abuse my position to pay tribute to you, because in this room I've been mentored by Funmi, and I want to pay homage to one person who has been mentored by you and is a professor today, the person who opened this session, Professor Eka, as well. And I think, please come forward, come forward. It's a, you know, if anybody asks you where were you when the ALC was founded, I know where I was, and I remember Echo always standing by Funmi's side, and it's real privilege and pride to see what's been happening, because this is part of the Nelson Mandela generation. You're part of it, and it hasn't died. Yeah. It is nurturing the future generation that will work for solidarity. So I just want to show that there's a through line, because the founder of the ALC was part of the generation that brought us all together in solidarity. For Liberia, for Sierra Leone, Kaide, Professor Kaide, you founded the CDD, and through that is the generation, and you're passing the baton on. So I just wanted to put that as a bookend to where we are today. Now, to the issues that you said, I'm going to be the one that sort of doesn't follow the script. The script. Well, only to be a Debbie Downer, because I hear how you ended, Alex, and I agree with you. And at the moment when the continent really did choose to stand up in solidarity for other voices, those efforts at providing solutions were disregarded or disrespected. You talked about the mission to Ukraine, Foreign Minister, and you also talked about the solidarity around Gaza. And we saw how those were also shut down and pushed aside or disrespected, and how institutions, multilateral institutions, were weaponized against some of the messages that you tried to put up as well. So I think it's worth just establishing that as a fundamental challenge in trying to get Africa to globalize and be part of that solution manuscript as well. The other thing that I want to also say is that at one level, you are right, Alex, and I think our foreign minister articulated that, but the rules are changing and they're changing very fast. And if you're not ready to seize that, you're going to be left behind at the platform as well. And there are no rules there isn't a guiding book that is going to accompany you into this new moment. You literally are rewriting the chapter. It's a completely different world. And that agency it's a passing moment. And if you don't grab it right now, you'll miss the moment. Because the rule makers of 80 years ago are the rule breakers. The question is whether we are going to be there to help shape what the future looks like. And I do worry that the pact of the future is of a different era. It was a completely different era where we thought there was still some remnants of multilateralism in the room. And today, I'm afraid, I have to say, that I'm not sure that there's much room, despite what you said, Alex, for progress as well. Number one challenge, we're waking up in an era where there are some strong voices who are calling for a defunding of the UN, a smashing of the system. So what space is there to have a concrete proposal for safeguarding the ideas that were put in the pact? Number two, one of the key architects of the UN hasn't even figured out what its talking points are, beyond wanting to smash it up, which is the US. And I think that we can't dismiss the power and the weight of what those around President Trump are advocating for multilateralism and the UN as well. And you're watching what's happening already with the debate with Europe as well. Number three, which then leads me to then what are the options, what are the spaces? Maybe we'll have to form new alliances, which I think Foreign Minister Pandor, you were getting at, whether it's plurality or minilateralism or any other form of alliances, because the fate of multilateralism will not just be decided in New York. In fact, it's almost discredited to do that. You have to find other centers. And some of those centers are in Addis, some of those centers are in New Delhi, some of those centers are in Latin America. And you'll watch what's going to happen with COP30 as well, where Lula is already defining what he sees as a vision of a new development financing architecture as well. And then the last thing I would say, Foreign Minister, I was glad that you emphasized the difference between those who are willing to engage, but those who are persuaded to go in another direction. And that undercuts the agency. When you choose to work outside of the collective, you can never ensure that your agenda will stand weight. When you choose as 53 to part company, then you undermine your power of the agency. When you choose to work against each other, even at the UN Security Council, you undercut yourself. When you choose to forum shop between regions, as we're seeing right now with the Great Lakes, you undermine the architecture of multilateralism. We had a 2002 moment for me when we talked about the glorious era of African diplomacy. It's virtually in crumbles. We need to protect it. And we cannot be complacent anymore because the train is out of the station in terms of undermining multilateralism, and we have to safeguard the little that we've got if we're serious about intergovernmental agency within the continent as well. I'll stop there.
Wow. So you see why the keynote and why we assembled this panel. Thank you. Leadership, leadership, leadership. It's the only mini statement I will make. If that train has bolted out the door, where is Africa's leadership? And I have an answer to it. Hopefully, I'll come to it in the end. At this moment, the floor is open for the debate to continue. Ground rule, 1 minute intervention with a statement as to what you heard. Give us a new fact, dispute something, or offer a solution. Please spend a minute. At this point, I'm going to hand over to you, Ambassador. Please, the podium is here. The approach is, we want to see the people speaking. Please come to the front. We want to see the people speaking. It's not about questions from the floor. Now, Ambassador, welcome your colleagues from the diplomatic community to give us I have my own list. I hope you have your own list. Mercy, do we have a list for the ambassador? Or you already know your people? I think you do.
Do we start with ambassadors?
Yes, we'll do you do ambassadors, I'll do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, let me start with my sister, Chenje Masoka.
Let me get my. Ooh. Thanks. Ah. I should have brought my iPad instead of my phone. It's not working. I'll just speak off the cuff in terms of what I recall. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. I think it has been a wonderful discussion and debate. Dr. Pandor, thank you so much for your insights. I think for me, one of the, or a few of the things that stuck out in the lecture is our future, so from a technological standpoint. So looking at technology, AI, and the future around that. What role do we play as a continent in that transition? We have the minerals, we have the critical minerals that are going to be important and where technology cannot move to the next level without it. So one of the things that I think would be imperative for us is to ensure that, as my colleague from Morocco said, that we define the terms of reference in terms of how we engage, particularly with our resources, particularly with those resources that are limited and that the world needs in order to move forward, whether it's with the energy transition or moving into the technology. So we have to be able to be strong. We have to be able to be united in terms of how we approach this as a continent. Because as a collective, we know that we have what it takes to be able to come up with terms of references that will definitely benefit the continent. But if we do not operate as a collective, and then the old divide and conquer rule can come into play again. There'll be a different kind of scramble for Africa because it is happening, and I think we just need to be much more mindful of that and work collectively. And there is a wonderful opportunity right now because as the world is shifting in terms of partnerships, in terms of relationships, where is that leadership that comes from our continent in order to do that? So more cohesive engagements, but with a focus on that. I think I'll just stop with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. I did not introduce her as Ambassador Chenje Masoka, High Commissioner of Zambia. Now may I invite my brother Biruk Mekonnen, Ethiopian Ambassador to the UK.
Good evening. I was not ready for the debate, but I was listening attentively from Madam Minister and also the panelists. And I'm not going to mention all the points raised by the panelists and the speakers, but I just want to highlight two most important points that I see an opportunity for Africa. And the first one is a new leadership in the form of the AU Commission, which gives Africa to really steer the discussion and the debate about its place in the global world. The second one is the one we have been seeing the global dynamics, and this is the right time for Africa to have its own policy independence to shape its own courses. It has all its factors and elements, and with this two most important factors, I think it's the right time to call the Mandela generation that has been repeatedly mentioned. I thank you.
Thank you. Now may I invite my brother, Kingsley Mamabolo, South African High Commissioner. Even though I intimated him should speak, he said South Africa has spoken already, but we have not heard you.
Yeah, well, I tried to get out of this one by suggesting that my minister here has already spoken. Well, what do you say after such perfect presentation all around? Maybe the points I can pick up, and I was hoping to hear more about this, is that indeed I think Africa has always been about coming together and finding solutions. The very African Union, its constitution, is an indication that we've been talking about integration politically, economically, and otherwise. And so this is the call for us to work together is not new. We're always trying to find that. And I think former Minister Naledi Pandor, by talking about the stage where we are, the second decade of implementation of our 2063 agenda, it shows that we are making progress in this direction. We still are not there. I analyze the Pact for Future as an indication that at least we can reach some agreement globally. If you looked at the Millennium Development Goals of 2000, we came out of those and still pointing a finger and not agreeing between the developed and the developing countries. And you now had the SDGs where, at least to some extent, we could reach an agreement as to what are the issues of concern for the emerging and developing countries. Maybe what we should talk more of is how do we creatively and innovatively present the same cases that we have been presenting all along, because as I say, it's not like we're starting now to talk about unity. And I think all this talk about maybe the fact that we can talk about technology and so on as a way of improving our input and all this. Before I sit down, my worry is our response. Everybody has talked very much about the extent to which the world is changing. It's becoming even more difficult and rough. What is our response? President Biden, before he retires, one of the things he does is to visit Angola. And we all know why, the Lobido corridor, because of the critical minerals. President Trump does not hide the fact that as he talks about peace in Ukraine, and the most biggest important thing to him are the critical minerals. He says you must do this. And these are in Africa. So you can imagine that the next battle in Africa is going to be about these critical minerals. And my question would be, what response, how are we responding to this challenge as Africa? In our Africa Continental Free Trade Area, are we beginning to talk about the pricing? Minister Pandor talked about our need to add value. And the only way we can add value is to make sure that we speak on one voice on this issue. Because what is going to happen is they'll come to South Africa. If South Africa is difficult, they'll go to the DRC because you are talking different languages. Because you see, our Africa Continental Free Trade shouldn't just talk about the pricing of coffee and many other things. These are key issues that we should begin to address. Thank you very much.
Thank you, High Commissioner. May I invite any other diplomat in the room who wants to take a floor? Anyone? Come forward. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, please, you're welcome. Huh? Oh, I have to. Okay, okay. Diplomats. Okay, okay. Any other diplomat in the room? Mercy? No? May I now invite one of the participants who's working very closely with diplomats? And so, Ms. Hannah Ryder, could you please come? Yes.
Asante Balozi, and it's a pleasure to be here. Hannah Wanjia Ryder. Thank you, Honourable Minister, and to panelists for your great insights and proposals as well. As somebody who does work with many of you, I agree very much with what has been said in terms of the urgency of the moment, especially what Dr. Comfort was saying, and also with regards to the strength of our continent coming together. It's something that really runs through the principles of the organization I run, Development Reimagined. We're always trying to encourage that coordination, and exactly why we work with the diplomats here. We have to use our bargaining power. And it's not just a natural resources game. You know, we've always been seen as natural resources. But I think it's also about our business models, what we have to offer to the rest of the world, our thinking, our ways, how we resolve conflicts. Yes, we still have some, but there's others who have them. So let's be strong in who we are. I think we have also an important moment at the moment with the G20, South Africa's G20 presidency. There is already a narrative, a fairly negative narrative, around the foreign ministers' meeting and the finance ministers' meeting, which I think we need to counteract quickly. And it brings me to the point that Honourable Minister was making around even the peace forum and the peace work with the Russia-Ukraine peace mission. We have to be not only talking about our challenges, but we have to also talk about where we have and are trying to contribute to global leadership and trying to provide extra leadership. And I think we have to be really intentional about that. It's not that we're always sucking from the rest of the world. We are giving a great deal to the rest of the world all the time. So I think that's part of it. And again, this is a really important moment, and I hope we can use both the G20 and the UN in order to strengthen our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ambassador, I take it you've handed over to me.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was excellent. It's also nice to see that the diplomatic community is working with young Africans, right? Doing sharp analysis. You see the trend. So let me read out statements from online. There's a question, and I'm not going to read out the question because we did say no questions. Now I'm going to move to the statements. I'm Godwin Jha, Assistant Professor at the University of Alberta. My comment is this. A running theme is that all the speakers talk about a new African leadership. This presupposes a new agency. The approaches are different though. So maybe we can think of an African leadership for a manifestation of different futures with a common theme of Africa's centrality to world systems. It will be good to pick strategic areas of Africa and its multiple futures and build leadership around them. Thank you. That was Godwin Jha. Then a second statement. My name is Tonya McLean, Research Fellow with the Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, Nigeria. The speaker talked about new partner countries like China, Turkey, India, Brazil, and Russia presenting themselves as partners to Africa and the lack of colonial baggage as a selling point. But beyond this narrative, what tangible benefits do they offer that differ from traditional Western powers? We are risking a new form of dependency, what I would call flirting with hyenas, as it were, especially when we see the militarization of regions like the Horn of Africa by both these emerging powers and established Western players. Finally, I think it's still from the same person, or this person didn't put their name, the diplomatic community must, as a matter of urgency, promote a continental foreign policy as a first step to promoting unity. This will include considering sending a single diplomatic envoy to the UN to represent the continent's interest instead of the fragmentation in membership we currently have. African membership on the Security Council must be made permanent. Now, that a single diplomatic rep, well, that is something. Can I just say, therefore, let me invite to the podium. So we have quite a number of names on the list. We will close the list at a particular point. If there are any other names up, list is closed. We brought it round. Okay, please add one more. So we'll just keep going. But we will not reach everyone unless you take 30 seconds, 1 minute. Otherwise, people won't have a chance to speak. May I call Ambassador or Professor Yusuf Mahmoud, who's one of the leading practitioners at the African Leadership Center. May I say that in the room, we have our leading practitioners. There's an intergenerational community at the African Leadership Center. Those students you see in the room also have policy practitioners who interact with them through a leadership exchange and insight series. Prof. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, please get more mics ready, because I think maybe the mics are tired, like the West.
Thank you. I just want to focus on this elusive word called leadership. One of the early meanings of leadership is the capacity to facilitate the crossing of thresholds and die in the process. In other words, you no longer need it. And it's often called liminal leadership. This is a type of leadership that usually develop what they call edge walkers or bridge builders, from something that is coming to an end to something that is yet to be born. It's the transition from what is to what if. And these type of liminal leaders, they usually lead from the emerging futures. And once they have imagined the futures that are dawning, they do three things. One is understand that the future is not going to be playing by the same rules. And therefore start dismantling and interrogating the assumptions that have informed those dominant rules. You cannot dismantle the master's house unless you dismantle the master's tools. Whether it is our understanding of development, understanding of peace, understanding of security, the word development, you know where it's coming from, and so on and so forth. So that's one, changing the understanding of what, because colonization is always in the mind. So if we want epistemic freedom, we need to engage, and that's part of that liminal leadership. Second is recognizing and being kind to the world that is under stress, that is coming to an end. Because a world that is coming to an end is busy extending the expiration date. And I agree, I think, with the statement that the pact for the future is a recipe for delaying the inevitable. We call it reform. We don't call it transformation. We call it reform. change, just like we say climate change. And we use the solutionism and the imaginary that have incarcerated us to resolve it. So that's the last thing, and this is the history tells us of how hegemonic orders come to an end. And one of the characteristics of hegemonic orders, when the end is inevitable, the worst come to the top. So history is full of that. And interestingly enough, those who come to the top and worse are the ones that accelerate the demise. And therefore, we need to move from the idea of disrupting to dismantling, because disrupting is thinking out of the box. You're not questioning the box. So a liminal leadership means is the one that help us cross from what is ending to what is being born. And you cannot do that until you take on the mentorship of facilitating that crossing. So that's all I'm going to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. May I call on our visiting professor, former governor of Ekiti State, Dr. Kaede Fayemi. 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Professor Olani Shaki. Well, let me also join fellow participants to commend the brilliant presentation by Dr. Pando and the contributions of the panelists. For me, what the presentation brings to the fore, alongside the panelists' comments, is really what it means for the continent. And the first thing that jumps at me as you were all speaking is that it's now inevitable that the continent must pay particular attention to the very urgent strategic task to develop a leadership cadre. We have leaders. We've always had leaders. But somehow, over the last decade or two, or let me just say, in the aftermath of the new Partnership for African Development, we seem to have suffered a decline in leadership on the continent. And there has to be a very urgent task of developing a new leadership cadre, both at the African Union. Yes, His Excellency, the Moroccan ambassador, mentioned that we have a new leadership now that we can take advantage of. The Ethiopian ambassador and the Moroccan ambassador. But even the nature of that emergence itself seems to divide rather than unite. And we have to figure out how to now build this new leadership to respond, in my view, to the context of this competing global order, and ensure that those who come to the fore as leaders actually understand this transition, this Gramscian transition between the old that is dying and the new that is not yet fully born. And I think this leadership would also require an understanding of a comprehensive Pan-African perspective. Dr. Panda also spoke about that, so that what we have is a continental response, not individual nationalistic order. The thought for me, in terms of this leadership cadre that needs to emerge, would be that it is charged with the full-time task to defend and advance Africa's interest. And we saw that. We saw that leadership demonstrated when South Africa, particularly when Madam Pando was foreign minister, took up that challenge of defending the norms and standards that the world has promoted since 1948 on questions of Palestine and Gaza. Even though we realize that those who are supposed to be the main protectors of those norms were the ones who first put the idea of South African leadership, the case filed at the ICJ, the United Front on Ukraine. And I believe that's where ALC comes in, Madam Vice President. This has to return to leadership. And I will build a consortium of institutions that can now take on this urgent task of developing that cadre, training that cadre, infusing that cadre with the pride and knowledge that it's time for Africa. And it's time to see what is going on as opportunity rather than adversity.
Thank you. When you have academics who left academic world, then became politicians, and they're very eloquent, and they come back to the academic world, you stand next to them and they're actually addressing you instead of, finishing the... So this is a bit where, I have to start to apologize to people, because I will not take everyone on the list, but we will close this segment in 15 minutes and run to the conclusion. The next three people, please get ready to just move up. Actually, what Ambassador Esipiso and I did last year was that people were coming and sitting in front and then taking, and I should have remembered that order. I want to call the next three people: Wadeza Rukato, Dr. Godwin Murunga, Executive Secretary of Codesria and former Director of the African Leadership Center. Next, and the third person will be Kayode Adeniyi. If you finish rapidly, 1 minute each, we'll take more people as we go along. So, yes, please come up. So I would say, Godwin, please sit here ready, and people can come ready. Wadeza, you're coming up. Thank you.
Prof. 1 minute. Okay. I think to start, my observation from the interventions that were offered tonight by speakers and by the audience essentially demonstrate that we're living in a time of polycrisis. I'm surprised the term hasn't come up yet tonight. There's a lot that requires our attention, and there's a lot that requires us to spend time and energy focusing. I think also this is a time for honesty. As Dr. Pandwo said, we're no longer in the Mandela era. And so we need to be incredibly honest about the time that we're in now, the Africa that we have now, and the Africa that we don't have now. A big part of this for me is around the relationship that African leaders have amongst themselves and the relationships that African leaders have with their people. And I think a big one around this is accountability. We've seen no shortage of African people trying to hold their leaders to account, and we've seen no shortage of that being thwarted, being shut down. And so my question, or I guess offering to the leaders who we've heard from and others who are listening, is what are you doing to hold your peers to account? What are you doing to stand alongside your people and make sure that the people who make decisions are doing that for the benefit of their people? And so when I reflect, I guess, more broadly, and my closing take is around what this time asks us to bring in relation to ensuring that the Africa that emerges is one where people can exist in dignity. Thank you.
Dr. Godwin Murunga. And that's an ALC alum, by the way. Thanks, Wadeza.
Thank you very much for me, and all protocol observed. I think we've worked as though Africa needs to socialize itself in playing in a world with rules that have been set for it. And I think we need to begin to think about the extent to which Africa can set the rules. Because I think that the world that is coming before us is one in which whoever sets the rules will not be as important as whoever can control how the rules are played. And I want to suggest that a process of socializing Africa into creating the rules and leading the engagement with those rules has to be done within our universities. And Dr. Pando did make a point which I appreciated very much, given that I lead a Pan-African social science research organization, the need to reverse the decline in African universities. We can set up as many policy institutions as we want. We can set up many NGOs doing work within civil society. Unless we put resources into universities, we're not going to be able to generate people who can set the rules on behalf of Africa. And so I appreciate the point you made between reform and transformation. If we want Africa to play a role, a leading role in transformation, let's begin with our universities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Kayode Adeni from Ekiti State. So I will be building on what he just said. I'm a student at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and I'm also the president for the African program at the LSE. And I believe that, like she said, that actually we might not be at the forefront of AI right now, but the success depends on us. And also, the Moroccan ambassador said, we need to develop our terms of reference. I have worked for 5 years as a software engineer, and I know that AI is as good as the data behind it. Africa has the data. And Africa has the population, so how are we guiding our data? When you come to Europe and you open your phone, you see a lot of cookies. Whether you are fasting or not, you might accept or you not accept the cookies. So that tells us that we need something that we need to guide our data together. And I remember when Dr. Kayode Fayemi was contesting for governorship, there's this slogan that he used to say here on radio, that's a collective rescue mission. So we need to come together to develop something like the GDPR that guides our data as Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You obviously have been watching Dr. Kayode Fayemi for a long time, isn't it? So you've done so well. This last group of people did well. Can I call up very rapidly? Is it Tangai Marega, Africa Diaspora? Please come up quickly. Can I say so? There's some engagement on this platform. The QR code is there. And of course, our director in London has been shaking me down to remind people of the higher education panel on Wednesday, which will have a number of eminent academics on the panel. Can I also ask that we have ALC-related people would have to forgive me, because let's give the floor to some of our guests from outside. I'll call on Chris Isike. El Gassim Wan is one of our senior practitioners. And I will take, before I close this list, who's Ola Human? Right, it's you. You'll be, okay, you'll be the third. Thank you. Please come down, please. I hope you're not reading from that paper.
That's the call for intellectual abilities. But I wouldn't embarrass the eminent teachers and professors standing here by reading from the paper. But it's just the terms of reference. And the first kind of term of reference, my name is Tangai Marega. I am a Zimbabwean diaspora. I come from Zimbabwe. And what brought me here is accurately connected to what Madam Dr. Scott, I think, mentioned about the land reform. Africa has got the land. Africa can house the rest of the world, probably 3 to 4 continents or regional blocks with the land. And therefore, what is the dichotomy right now is when we actually, as Africans, take the stage to drive a policy that is meant to balance and assure and stabilize the international stage, again, our policies are treated and received with a lot of skepticism. So, not so sure with your experience within the diplomatic circles, how much assurances have you advocated the good intentions of the African policies that they are there to stabilize the international system that is currently in a lot of disbalance in terms of equity, access to real human rights, not the rhetoric human rights. And so far at the present moment, we still are actually grappling with the idea of rhetoric, acceptance of African permanence. But where is the actual action? And I think the solution and the answer to that is, let's remove all sanctions. Let's remove all kind of trade measures and embargoes, and let's assure the global international community that Africa is a force for good and we are the mother of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Chris Isike, from one of our partner institutions, Head of Department of Political Science, University of Pretoria. Welcome.
Thank you very much to the ALC. I will start with just one refrain, thanks to the panel as well. The refrain is that a sick doctor should not be offering treatment to anyone. You must first treat yourself before you can offer treatment to anybody. And talking about the treatment for Africa, the mechanics of it, I'm really pleased that Dr. Pando talked about collectivized action to give meaning to African agency. And I think that one of the ways that I've suggested in some of the writings I've done about this is what I call group hegemonic leadership. Why? Because Africa does not have a hegemon in the liberal sense of the term. So the idea that we need one person to represent us in public fora is good, but it's not feasible. What is feasible, however, is for us to provide group leaders from the different continents, right? And of course, Morocco will say, why should we cede it to Egypt? Why should we cede it to Algeria? So I'm suggesting that it can be rotational. If we have one regional leader standing to take collective actions and negotiate for the rest of the continent on our behalf, we will be able to give effect to that collectivized agency that Professor Dr. Pando talked about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For the first time, I might abuse my position as moderator because really it's about dismantling the existing structure and asking all regions to have their representatives sitting on the UN Security Council so that there's a rotation around it. I believe firmly in that. I hadn't talked to you about it, Chris, but I think there's an argument to be made there. That will be my own strong argument. Sorry, did I usurp your role? Please take your 1 minute. Thank you.
Did you say 1.5 minutes or 1 minute? 1 minute, all right. Let me quickly say greetings and thank you very much for putting on this event, and my esteemed elders and guests, thank you very much. Let me first start by saying very quickly, 2063. I'm a child of the 60s. When I was growing up, I used to hear things like, oh, in 40 years' time, 20 years' time, we will have running water throughout Africa. Oxfam and all of these companies made millions of pounds from these adverts out of us. So when I hear 2063, that scares me. 2, Congo. We're in the 100th year anniversary of the birth of Patrice Lumumba, who would have been 100 this year. Nothing has changed. It's still about extracting our resources. It's still about making sure that we don't add value to our resources. Nothing that all of you don't know about. However, it's all exactly the same. So let me just quickly say give you another couple of dates. 1963, the compromise, the AU. It was a compromise because it was never supposed to be set up in the way that it actually materialized. And we are living through that continued deterioration after that date, because what came about was nothing like it's supposed to have been. And that's why we need to get rid of the AU, scrap it, restart, and start thinking about, even if we're paying an organization or groups of people to actually help us to advocate on our behalf. Let us also talk about civil society, because this is where it all begins. It is about militarizing civil society and having civil society and the rule of law in exactly the same way as South Africa lectured to the Palestinians. Oh, sorry, Mama. I've got one more. Did you say 30 seconds? It's exactly the same way that the Palestinians, South Africa spoke to, was spoken to with regards to how they are creating genocide. Let me end on genocide. Okay. Okay.
But thank you. Thank you. I gave you 2 minutes. Thank you. Yeah. Elga Simon.
No, thank you so much. Congratulations, Madam Minister, and congratulations also to the panelists. I think it was really excellent. I have just 2 points. The first one, at least listening to those who took the floor, there is a lot of emphasis on the relationship between Africa and the rest of the world, including in the Security Council, the G20, and other fora. And indeed, it is important. I do not mean to underestimate it. But I also believe, and it's a point that Salim Ahmed Salim made in 1990 in a seminal report on changes, fundamental changes in the world and what should Africa do, is that the ability of Africa to weigh internationally depends on it getting its acts together within the continent. And we tend to put a lot of, and maybe for those who don't know me, I worked for 23 years at the AU, so I'm quite familiar with a number of AU policies. So we spend a lot of time. We want to be permanent members of the Council. We want to be in G20. But you can't be a permanent member for as long as we have the economic situation we have the conflict situations we have the challenges of caring after our people. We have seen it during the COVID-19 crisis. Your capacity to really use those for us is absolutely diminished. And that's why I believe, without neglecting what we need to do abroad, let's focus on building as Salim put it, the inner strengths of Africa. And here, Madam Minister, just to go back to all the issues you raised on technology, on nuclear energy, and other issues, what is strange and what maybe many people don't know, there is no single aspect on which the EU does not have policies. I say not a single. Nuclear energy, AFCON is based in South Africa, the African Commission on Nuclear Energy. Belinda Batriti speak about the peaceful use of nuclear energy. We have CADEP on agriculture, Ambassador of Morocco. We have the single African air transport market. We have the protocol on free movement of people. We have the CFTA. And I could go on. Peace and security, plenty of issues that the area have worked in. All of them. Our problem is implementation. Implementation, not policies. We have them all. So can we focus on implementation? And here, just one single word, and I conclude. Implementation is not a matter of resources. Believe me. Of course it matters. It's more about creativity, agility, and political commitment. One last point. We spoke, I'm done. One last point, an important one. We spoke about a new beginning because we have a new commission. We're all happy about it. But just the important point, can we start with one single thing? Could all African head of states attend AU summits? so that we can say we have more African head of states at the AU summit than in meetings with external partners. I think that would be an excellent message. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before I call Ambassador Esipisu to come run the closing section, I want to also ask any panelist who has a burning statement to make because of what you've heard to indicate so. But I want to crave your indulgence. There are two of my students on this list, even though I've closed the list. I want to be partial to them for 30 seconds if they're still in the room. And where is Francisco Moreno? Where is Ken Ishika? Are they still in the room? I would like you to sprint forward very quickly for 30 seconds to make your statement. I am partial to you on this list because I still have like 12, 13 more names and I'm closing the list. Rapidly, please. You can even share the 30 seconds if you want.
Thank you very much. My name is Francisco Sanchez Moreno. I am an Argentinian Chilean scholar and an ALC student. And my comment is that I think that we are at a turning point where what worked before is no longer effective. I believe that the coming generations do not believe that that solutions will be found through the large organizations that governed the last century. And as we know, democracy in many countries is at stake and in many are losing it. And I believe that in the coming period, regardless of how we organize ourselves, the human component of leadership will take on a lot of value. And although it may be counterintuitive in this more individualistic and AI-driven world, I am sure that the value of fraternity, community, and a human-centered approach will hold significant importance. In that, Africa and continents like Latin America have a lot to contribute. Fraternity, community, and a human-centered approach, I believe, is our greatest future resource to be tapped and shared with the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
Hello, thank you for your lecture and your talk here. I'm Ken from Japan, and I'm also an ALC student and chief evening scholar. As I'm from Japan, I'm really interested in nuclear affairs policy. And as you may know, Japan has a really contradictory policy over nuclear affairs, as we are not only experienced the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but at the higher level politics, we do have a lot of issues regarding the US and at the international security level. So Africa is a hope for me because it has established the Pelindaba Treaty in 2009, if I remember correctly, and has stood as the only continent that has successfully placed the continent as a nuclear weapon-free zone. And my exploration is how can Africa continue to strengthen its presence as a norm entrepreneur in certain issue areas. And my assumption is that frameworks like G77 or even wider communities will help enhance the agency of Africa. And I think that could be achieved through the cooperation with countries like Latin American countries and Southeast Asian countries. I think that has also brought about the successful answer, for example, treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And I would like to know if any of you have any thoughts over the no entrepreneurship in Africa in regards to its agency. Thank you.
Thank you. So you can see what our classes are like, short, sharp. Thank you so much. My time is now up. And before I hand over to Ambassador Esipisu, the last two comments online. My name is Brian. As a global global power dynamics shift, Africa must assert its place in decision-making spaces. The UN Pact for the Future presents an opportunity, but may not bring real influence, or it might be just more promises. Last but not least, Kevin James Kewer, who actually is at ALC's regional hub in Cameroon. The points on the need for deeper integration and leadership are important. It is necessary to add to this the need to make more efforts to increase the share of local in brackets, African states funding for African integration and the implementation of its agenda. On that note, the closing session is upon us. If you recall, one of the reasons we've been so partial to Kenya is that ALC's continental home is in Nairobi, Kenya, and our relationship with the High Commission of Kenya has been a really strong one. Ambassador Esipisu just stepped down as ambassador. But we haven't lost him because he's now a visiting professor at the African Leadership Center at King's. So please come forward and run this closing session. And it will be our partner, Amani Africa, and our director, executive director, will have the last word. But first, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fumi. Dr. Pando, should I say former colleagues or colleagues? Colleagues in diplomacy and colleagues here at King's. In terms of just reflecting on all that has gone on, and there's lots that has been said, mostly good. As you know, Africa must define power on its own terms. That's been said and repeated. And it is something that Africa needs to embrace. For a long time, Africa has engaged in global power structures as a petitioner, I'm afraid to say, asking for aid, lobbying for fair trade, seeking inclusion. I mean, these things are not given to you for free. You kind of have to set out your stall, be enthusiastic about chasing what it is that Africa needs, and being able to take it home finally. So it is time to embrace the reality that this power isn't going to be given to us. Power is always taken, and we're going to have to take some of it at some point. And Africa's rise will not come from rhetoric. We talk a lot because rising is not going to be granted by friends, I think, as I've said. It needs action. It needs Africa to be united in terms of what it is it's asking for, and to act in one accord, as Dr. Pando was saying, as it did before, in terms of the fight against apartheid, for instance. So some of the things I think about controlling of value chains. So no more exporting raw materials without value addition or beneficiation. So industrialization must really happen. And for that to happen, we're going to have to resist the people leading the new scramble for our continent, for our minerals and for stuff like that. If you keep them at arm's bay, it is one way that the future is going to be one that should be looked up to. Then there's a question of securing the continent. We know that no global power is defenseless. So it's always surprising when Africa acts as if it is defenseless on the international stage. We have to defend what is ours. And Africa must fund its own development. No real power comes from donor dependency. It is something we really must embrace. The idea that there's too much crying about USAID, for instance, about the UK here cutting further aid. I think we really need to move away from that and look at what is it that we have ourselves in the first place, and how can we start to move from this idea that people will, whenever they feel like, get out a whip and whip you with the aid whip. Also, I think we've talked about uniting and integrating. So a divided continent cannot negotiate as a bloc or negotiate at all, in my view. So this is something we're going to continue to have to do. I know my colleague was saying African leaders don't attend the AU summits in the same way they do bilateral meetings with donor partners. But they used to at some point. You'll recall in 2001 with the rebirth of the OAU into the AU in Lusaka, the summits that followed in Durban, in Maputo, you always had more than 45 heads themselves. And this is something that they can go back to because they showed before it's doable, so they can do it again. Next thing is feeding ourselves. Our sovereignty is the foundation. Our food security and food sovereignty is the foundation for any independence. It is a simple thing to achieve. So I can't understand why Africa is reluctant to achieve food security. Each one of our countries can do it. Each one of our countries does little to do it. And it's something that we ought to be able to do. And finally, I think that we have to work together to defeat this emergence of transactionalism as a way of life. This is one that we are going to have to work together to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Solomon Deso, a long time friend and colleague. It's great to partner together on this. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Prof. May I start by extending greetings and also deep appreciation to you, Dr. Pandor, for your very excellent and probing keynote address. To you, members of the panel, for your rich contributions that have expanded our imagination as we reflect on this deeply difficult and challenging moment that we find ourselves in. And most of all, of course, to you, Prof, and the entire Africa Leadership Center team for putting together yearly an incredibly enriching and always probing theme. Last year, as you mentioned, about Africa's agency, and here we are today reflecting on very important points. I think what I heard, and of course, let me thank you also on behalf of Amana Africa for making us a partner organization for this signature event. What I heard today is basically that first, we are in a completely different time and moment. The world is at a crossroads. Africa, as part of the world and on its own, is also at a crossroads. And this requires, as have been said by Dr. Pandor, by the members of the panel on the high table, but also other interveners, that it requires a complete abandoning of our habits, our scripts, and the rules on the basis of which we have been operating so far. These are incredibly required. But to do that would also require us to appreciate the value of Africa. 4 points that Dr. Pandor provided us to start with, but many others included other areas as well. If we go back to history, when we talk about modernity, it is often imagined that it comes from other parts of the world. Africa is not imagined in those terms. Born in Blackness, the book that Howard French wrote, basically tells us how the modern world was actually of and because of Africa. And that is important to understand. And when we think about what futures would be coming, it's important also to go back to Du Bois, as Dr. Pandor mentioned, because we need to address the legacies of those histories of the enslavement of human beings through the transatlantic trade in African humans. Colonialism, apartheid. And Dr. Pandor asked the question, what happened to the generation of free Mandela? What happened to that generation? I'm not sure if we have heard an answer to that. Are we in a post-ideology world where everything has become about material things and money? Could that be one of the reasons? And is our redemption, potential redemption, as you're a student from, yes, put it, would humanity, community, solidarity and fraternity, would that be the source of our redemption? And would it be the case that we have to actually recognize fundamentally that the crisis is a crisis of ideas first and foremost, that it is a crisis of values first and foremost, that it is only when we have recognized that we can be able to move forward. And indeed, Africa, as has been said, not just in terms of the critical minerals, as the other student from LSE said, it's also a huge source of data for the new technology of AI. But are we protecting that huge resource or data that we have? Not just the critical minerals, of course, we have to protect them, but even that data from human beings as Africans is the other thing that we need to bear in mind. And of course, two things that have been added. One is, what are the things that are due to Africa as a matter of right? As a matter of right. It's not as a matter of charity. For Africa to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council is not a matter of charity. It is a matter of right. Irrespective of and however we screw up ourselves, it doesn't matter that we screw ourselves up. I don't think that there is anyone in the world today who can stand up and say, I have it sorted out for myself, that I am internally okay. No one. But to make it effective, of course, we have to address our internal incoherence, divisions, and that is where the African Union and its role comes into the picture. And the question of how do we change and reimagine membership in the UN Security Council? I had the privilege working with Shuvai and others, African experts, to lead, together with Namibia, an African high-level panel on Africa and the reform of the multilateral system. And one of the ideas that we put forward is actually to affirm regional-based membership in the UN Security Council, whereby, as have been mentioned, it doesn't belong to a single country. That country becomes accountable to the region and represent the voice and responsibility of the region as a whole. That is the kind of approach that would also make the UN Security Council representative of and vested in not national interest, but collective interest, because that is what the UN Security Council has been established for the collective good of the world, not for holding it back and basically failing and betraying the fundamental pledge of the UN Charter, saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war. That is exactly what happened because of failure of accountability and responsibility. The African Union can play that contributing role. As mentioned earlier on, the role of the A3, if you study it, if you look at it, clearly demonstrates that this is possible and it can be done. And people ask you, but it requires changing the UN Charter. No reform of the Security Council can happen without changing the UN Charter. No reform, whatever kind it takes. So the fact that it is said to be by region, obviously it requires changing the UN Charter. But would there be any other way of changing the UN Security Council, reforming the UN Security Council, or transforming it without changing the UN Charter? Not at all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes. Points absolutely well made. But take it to the General Assembly. That's what I would say. Take it to the General Assembly. If there's a burning statement you want to make, please make it now. Should I stand by to give votes of thanks? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. There's something that I felt did not get enough, didn't get any recognition this evening, and that was the question of women, peace and security. And Mr. Barr, standing here, just reminded me about that. Well, I just feel that that resolution 1325 was an African resolution. It was brought in by Namibia in 2000, but it was brought in at a time when the only way of looking at women was to look at them as rape victims. And that resolution 1325 said women should be at the negotiating table. They are not at the negotiating table anywhere in the world right now. And it's time for us to put our foot down with a firm hand and say that we have to be at the table. And that's not just Africa, it's everywhere. And I've said this, when the Ukraine war started, I actually challenged a president or two that I happened to be in the room with and said, where are the women at the table? Anyway, they looked at me with big eyes and we're still in the same spot. So I really want to encourage everybody to ask that question. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Tomorrow evening, and that is so true. I was at the UN at the time when 1325 was adopted. I think Ambassador Yusuf Mahmoud as well. Tomorrow evening, and a lot of my students, I think, have registered. Julia Gillard with Dr. Naledi Pandor, with Ms. Bisi Adele Efayemi, with Ms. Hannah Tete, will be on a panel on global women's leadership. And 1325 will be one of the things I will discuss. So thank you so much. Does anybody want? Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, when I posed the question about the generation of Mandela, I am referring not to the absence of those who played a role, but about marshalling similar action today when others face harm. And I'm asking, do we have that level, both of civil society organization and ideological commitment that can give rise to such a global movement of support? That is the issue, not that you're absent or not doing things, but can we mobilize? And I think it's a question we've got to ask ourselves in the face of the harm, particularly that the people of Gaza and Palestine have faced, with many of us being inactive, silent, or silenced.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Anyone? Fantastic. We will hear from the Executive Director of the African Leadership Center, who will give a vote of thanks. Across from here, in that room, is a reception waiting, and I think King staff have been waiting. I don't want to be the one anymore that is, sitting, standing between us and that reception.
Thank you so much, Professor Fumi. All I want to just add is that we've heard the call quite clearly. I think one of the ideas behind this African Public Square is that it is an intergenerational space. We've heard very clearly from the younger people amongst us, and one of the things they have put firmly on the table is African people, citizens, whom even in the solidarity I think are often forgotten or are even brutalized as a result of their calls for action in different ways. But I really want to take this opportunity to say asanteni sana to you all, the panel especially. Dr. Naledi Pandor, I think you really awakened us and really inspired, I think, with your keynote. Thank you very much once again for accepting our invitation and for being here today. To the Embassy of Tanzania, very, very grateful. Thank you so much for accepting as well to co-host with us. And we're very grateful. Thank you so much. And I hope you will not turn away from us when we come to you again. To our partner, Amani Africa, thank you, Dr. Solomon, or Dr. Solo, as we call him. Thank you so much for accepting as well and also contributing to some of the background thinking. There is a paper available. There are a couple of background papers available. If you scan the QR code and engage with the platform, you will be able to find some of those ideas that he shared here today. To our panelists, Ambassador Scott, Ambassador of Morocco, Alex, Comfort, thank you so much for being here today and for participating very actively and provoking us, I think. I think there were some really interesting provocations that came from the panel that we will take on board. To all of you who spoke from the floor, who agreed to be tackled by either Ambassador of Tanzania or Professor Fumi, thank you so much for really coming and sharing your ideas, sharing your thoughts. I think we are sufficiently provoked. Thank you very much to all of you who have attended, both in the room physically and online. As all my colleagues have said, this is not the end. This is just the opening of Africa Week. So I hope your energy will remain throughout the week and you will attend all the different events that we have. Thank you also to the South African Broadcasting Corporation, SABC, who have been with us today and who have agreed to collaborate with us in this event. So with that, I would say once again, please join us across the hallway for refreshments and interaction with people who have been here today, maybe some people who you've wanted to speak to, but you're very welcome again to the African Leadership Center, to King's, and to the rest of Africa Week. Asanteni sana. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.